It is my pleasure now to welcome to our Bima someone who needs no introduction, of course, but she is the Director of Regions for the Shalom Hartman Institute. And I will tell you, she is the Director of Getting All Things Done for everyone, everywhere, certainly in our home. And so Rebecca was in Israel and now has come back and gracing us with her words and her insights. So it is my pleasure to welcome to our Bima a Rebbetzin of Congregation Shaarey Zedek, Rebecca Starr.
Well, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you and reflect on my trip to Israel this last week. And also thank you to the rabbis for giving me the honor, really the kavod, of speaking from this very special bima. So, like many of you, I've been pretty sad, pretty weepy these last 3 months, and I really felt the need to visit Israel, to hug my friends, to hug my family, to support them, to hear their stories, and to try and help out in some way. While I really understand the need to bear witness to the destruction and the devastation in the south along the Gaza border, I wanted to be among the living and to support those left behind and those in mourning. The pull towards my sense of Jewish peoplehood in this moment was strong, and I wanted to lean into it, even though I wasn't sure how I would feel or what I would find. So with those motives in mind, and with the support and blessing of my family and my workplace, I booked a ticket. When I arrived in Israel, the first place that I went was to our chosen family in Israel. The Schwartzes live in our partnership region in the Jezreel Valley, in the village of Shimshit. Many of you have heard Aaron and I tell you about our third son, Itai, who was a Shinshin in Detroit 2 years ago. His army service is a little bit different than some others in that he's completing a law degree at the University of Haifa and then will commit to being a lawyer for the army for quite a number of years after his schooling. He also has to go through basic training and officer training. On October 7th, he was on a base in the south, starting his training, and he experienced much of the trauma of that day as he stood guard for 36 hours straight with no sleep, only having learned earlier that week how to shoot a gun. He watched as victim after victim was brought to the base. He learned shortly after October 7th that one of his best friends from childhood, Rotem Dushi, was killed by terrorists in Kfar Aza as he ran to help rescue children in the Gan. In that period of 48 hours, our beloved third son lost his innocence, his optimism, and his feeling of safety. So one of our first stops was to Itai's friend Dushi's grave in Kibbutz Hanaton. Itai told me about 20-year-old Dushi's smile, his bravery, his smoking habit, his heart that was always open, and his silliness. I think Itai's heart is broken at the devastating loss of his friend as he mourns the thought of what Dushi's life could have been. He asked me some really hard questions. Rivka, he said to me, how could God have allowed this? How could he take my Dushi? Through my tears, I tried to tell him that this was human evil. He said, okay, but where was God? Why didn't God intervene? I answered that humans are the ones making the world go round and not always God. God just set the world into motion. I got the sense that none of these answers were satisfying for Itai. But I tried to encourage him to keep asking them and keep coming back to them. He said that he would, and then he proceeded to tell me all of the things that he and his friends have been doing to honor Dushi and what they will continue to do. We made memorial stickers for him, and I actually put some on the lunch tables today, so you will see Dushi's face there. He also said, we did something for Hanukkah. We made menorahs for him. We'll do something for Tu B'Shvat, and we're thinking about Yom HaZikaron and his Yartzeit date. And he said, I will continue to visit Dushi's parents. In the midst of his sadness and real feelings of loss, he was still leading and choosing to make things better in memory of his dear friend. Itai went back to law school last week as the universities were finally able to open. He volunteers with displaced families and children from the north, and he learned how to play the guitar over these last 2 months to try and bring joy and music and light into the world. Itai, along with his family, is making the choice to do good, to improve the world, instead of adopting a philosophy of apathy, frustration, and anger. Another short story about my luggage. It arrived late, and the next morning, the driver from the airport, he works for LL, called and said he would be delivering my luggage around midnight. Nadim, the Arab driver, was from Al-Fahim, not so nice Arab village. When Hila, my chosen Israeli sister, and Itai's mom heard this, she immediately jumped into action. She spoke to Nadim on the phone, and she explained that there were so many gifts and candies and cards and toys in these bags from America, and dental kits for soldiers and for the children who were displaced. And it would be so helpful if he could rearrange his entire route to arrive earlier in the day so that we could deliver these things to those who needed them. She said, "Please come and I'll make you a coffee and we'll talk." And you know what? She was so convincing that he did just that. He changed his route. We received the bags a couple of hours later. We drank a little coffee with Nadim. We didn't have to wait until midnight, and Nadim was the hero of the day, a local Arab driver who would then go on to make 24 or so more stops, delivering lost bags across the country of Israel. We made him feel like the hero that he was, and he made things happen for us. He made a choice to help and to do something. Even though it required him to veer from his plan, to go out of his way, he contributed something good to help Jews that day. And all he needed was a little cup of coffee. The next day, after picking some clementines in Givat Oz, near the town of Metula, I had the opportunity to sit with some of the volunteers and professionals from our partnership region. The Israeli farmers are really suffering because they are so short-staffed. So this was the day we decided to help. After we finished picking, we sat for a quick lunch, and I listened to Shaarey. She works in the partnership region with all of the campers that come to Tamarack from Israel each summer. Her brother was injured in his army service a number of years ago and is in a wheelchair. Her husband is in the reserves. She's barely seen him these last 3 months. He's working with bombs in Gaza. She has a small 2-year-old child, Peleg. Shai's mother and father are both volunteering to help counsel parents of wounded soldiers in the south and are basically never home. Shai's on her own with Peleg, working and trying not to worry about her husband every single second. She told me all of this, and then she said, "I have a friend in Kiryat Shmona who has a coffee shop." And she said, "I try to visit there because there's no business for him now that everybody has been evacuated from the north." She spoke about the funeral she attended these past months and about the difficulties of being a single parent. But she continues on, and she works for the region, and she helps her friend in the north by buying his coffee whenever she can get there. And she took the morning to pick clementines for a farmer in need. I made another stop in Afula. The college there has dorm space where families from the north are living, as they can't go home, obviously, due to security. They've been there for nearly 3 months, living in tiny dorm rooms with their children. Hila and I met with Liat, Naama, Shlomit, Ifat, and also Sarit, who joined us as one of the volunteer leaders from the region. These women shared many insights during our short time together. They have been changed by this experience, as one would expect, but I thought that they would be broken and hardened and angry, and they were not. They're all trying to pull themselves out of sadness and to take on new activities. They threw themselves into the work of caring for and educating their children. They built a community in those dorms that is caring and loving. They met people that they never would have met, and were very grateful for that opportunity. They had arguments with God, but also talked about having stronger faith than they had ever had before. One of them noted that she used to wonder why all Jews don't live in Israel. And she said, "Now I understand. Jews all over the world have a responsibility to each other, and we really need to be everywhere." Some of their husbands are in the reserves or are still working in the north. These women were extremely inspiring to me. After all that they had been through, and with really no end or answers in sight, they were focused on the positive and what they could do to make things better. It's really hard to believe that 1 short week ago at this time, I was in Jerusalem enjoying a beautiful Shabbat experience with wonderful food and glorious sunshine with my sister and her family in Jerusalem, the place that Aaron and I consider our second home. My brother-in-law and sister made Aliyah in 2021, they have 2 adult children living there. My nephews and 4 very, very cute and energetic grandchildren, all of whom were born in Israel. I don't want to speak for my nephews. They made Aliyah 9 and 10 years ago, but my sense is that living in Israel for them is the best way to contribute to the project of building, growing, and advancing the Jewish people. I have a lot of respect for them and those like them who led relatively comfortable lives in America, with big houses and steady incomes and big backyards. It's not easy to establish a life in a new country, to learn a new language, a new culture, to find jobs, to meet friends. But the Jewish state of Israel was predominantly built by people who either chose it out of love and ideology or because there was no other choice. They are leaders because they are building and contributing to the Zionist project, even when their fear and concerns are heightened. So these few small stories exemplify the essence of what I observed and absorbed in 6 short days in Israel. Small acts make a difference. Everyone is a leader. Everyone is grappling. Everyone has challenges. And war is in the air. The leadership model of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses, who led the people, the Jewish people, at one of the most difficult and challenging times in our history, might serve an example for us to consider this Shabbat. We read Parshat Va'era in the book of Exodus, the process of starting this Exodus journey out of Egypt. It's all put into play as Moses and Aaron are told by God to demand that Pharaoh free the Israelites. We read that Pharaoh's heart was hardened and that he would not let the people go. The parsha ends with the plague of hail, and next week we can anticipate reading the plagues that will continue. V'yidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, bo diber el Pharaoh, melech Mitzrayim, v'yishlach et b'nei Yisrael me'artzo. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Go and tell Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart from the land." Moses talks back to God and says, "The Israelites won't listen to me. How then will Pharaoh listen to me? Me, Moses, who gets tongue-tied." What really strikes me about these words is that Moses, the chosen leader of the Israelite people, actually pushes back when God orders him to speak to Pharaoh. This is a divine command, and he's so self-conscious and perhaps confused that he can't take the hint and just do the work at hand. He argues that the Israelites already won't listen to him. Of course, they're Jews, so that we know he's probably right on that count. But he also says that he doesn't think Pharaoh will listen to him because he's tongue-tied. We learn that Aaron will speak for Moses to the Jewish people. But Rashi explains that Moses must be the one to speak directly to Pharaoh at every communication point. He cannot go through Aaron. I think this goes beyond Moses' worry about his speech impediment and the challenges of expressing himself clearly. He's questioning his worthiness of as a leader. He's worried that he won't be able to do his job. Perhaps also he's a little apathetic. After all, it is a pretty huge ask. This decision that God made to appoint Moses as leader was significant because Moses was not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest or the most beautiful, but God chose someone, a regular person, who would rise to the occasion and ultimately change the course of history for the Israelite people. Moses the prophet appears human like all of us in this parsha. We each have our strengths and our weaknesses, but we also have the power to get things done, to move God's work forward, while also overcoming our fears, our worries, and our apathy. I want to suggest that we let Moses be our guide here. He was average, he wasn't pretty, he wasn't well-spoken, he was one of the people, but he had power. I left Israel with a huge sense of responsibility to continue to grow in the work that I do and to develop the Jewish community worldwide. It means I feel a responsibility to put my Jewish identity in front of all other identities that I carry at this particular moment in time. It also means that I have to take the time and energy to sort through the layers of complexity that are found within each of the stories that I told you today. I have many questions, and I feel forced to ask them. A few examples. What does it mean for Israel to fight this war, a just war, and lose so many young Israelis at the same time? How do Americans and Israelis feel about our safety and security after such a brutal attack in Israel? What will Gaza look like after the war, and who will oversee it? What questions will the IDF be asked about their actions? What will the future of Arab-Jewish relations look like? And how do we even engage in this project of shared society in Israel? What does it mean to leave home and never know when you might be able to go back? How do we raise children in times of complete upheaval? What will this trauma mean for the next generation? What role do American Jews play when Israel is a powerhouse on its own? These are only a few of the questions swirling around in my head, and I'm sure you all have the same and many others. My 6 days in Israel, I lived in complete dissonance. I went for 2 lovely hikes, I ate delicious food, I bought souvenirs and some rugelach home, I went to the Hartman offices to visit colleagues, I watched Itai's sister's dance recital, I went for some wonderful runs, I hugged my friends and family, and I celebrated Shabbat. And I mourned Dushi with Itai. I saw a soldier return from Gaza without his hands as he came to watch his sister dance. I listened to my niece and nephew who worry every day about their safety and the safety of their children in their home. I watched strong women raise children while displaced from their homes and communities. I hugged a shopkeeper in Jerusalem, rather she hugged me, who was grateful for my visit and implored me to help remove Rashida Tlaib from office. Yeah. I went to get milk at the grocery store, where I heard from mothers that they never knew when their sons in the Army and reserves would be able to come home for dinner, but they continued to prepare the meals in hopes that one of these days it might happen. And I visited a friend in Jerusalem whose family member, Hirsch Goldberg, is among the kidnapped and missing in Gaza. Tomorrow will mark 100 days of Hirsch's captivity. I think we have to hold all of these things all at the same time and push ourselves into them, even though they are opposing in nature. Moses was this model for us in his leadership. What can we do as individuals to lead, even when we're not the shiniest or most well-spoken? This is a question I'm continuing to ask myself and to ask my children, and I hope that you will join me in doing the same. Meanwhile, I'm inspired by the people that I met in Israel, and they are our models as well. We must continue to listen to their stories. May we all experience Besorot Tovot, better times ahead. Shabbat Shalom.